Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me for this week's Midweek message. We are in 1 Peter chapter 3, which is a fun one, a little controversial depending on kind of your belief system, I guess a little bit about gender roles and how God designed men and women. But we're in the middle of, if you kind of pick it up from where we ended last week, it was all about submission to authority. Even an evil Caesar, God designed us to submit to authority. We also see servants and masters. There's a design, a God-ordered headship authority structure that we need to honor as Christians. So now we're going to get from the public authorities and things like that to inside the family unit, the family home, and what that structure is supposed to be, what that is designed to be. And Peter is talking about husbands and wives from a perspective of having a wife. If you know what tradition says about him, the Bible says he was married. But even going beyond that, we get the sense that he traveled with his wife, and what tradition says is they even died together. And so that's outside of biblical sources, but they stuck together a lot. There was, what he's about to tell us was practiced in his relationship with his spouse. So let's dig in, see what it has to say. 1 Peter chapter 3. And we're going to go through probably just 7 verses because there's a lot to talk about in these 7 verses. Verse 1, likewise, wives, be subject to your husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. So this submission is an outreach, which is awesome. So it's saying, all right, women, this is for you. Men, we're going to get to men, so don't worry about it. For women to start, be subject to your husbands. People get offended at that right away. There's this idea of an inequity or inequality that somehow women are designed to be submissive to men. That is not at all what this is saying whatsoever. There is no inequality between men and women. We are all reflective of what? The image of Christ. That's what we're designed in. We're completely different. And that's where you get in trouble today, by acknowledging the differences that are God-given, God-designed, God-purposed. But it's not that all women are subject to all men. That's not saying this at all. In the family structure, there is a design. That's what it's saying. So as far as submission goes, this is husband and wife. Not wife and neighbor's husband. Not wife and some other context where you're throwing in another man into it. Nope. No, this is husband and wife. And so in this, you need to be subject to your husbands. And so some of that's especially modern day, there's a pride sense of that women's rights or advocacy, and so much of that is taken away from what the Bible is instructing. The Bible acknowledges difference and family roles, and the farther we get away from the family roles as God has designed, we get more and more problems. So here, be subject to your own husbands, and one of the reasons here, so that even some who do not obey the word. So this is talking about a context of a godly woman and an ungodly man, which in Roman times, that would not have been super common. Your religion was what your husband said your religion was. And so this is an outlier already in that we're talking about a woman who is saved, who knows Jesus, and you still, this is what Peter is saying, you still stay under submission to your husband. And so it's not, oh, I'm saved and my husband doesn't acknowledge Jesus, so I'm out. I will not submit. I will not respect. I will not in any way be the wife I'm called to be because I got saved now. That's not what we're called to do at all. And in fact, this is how you can win someone over. And this is not, all right, I'm saved. Now I'm going to pester my spouse until they are saved as well. That is not the route we were supposed to take. You're supposed to live here by example. So you can acknowledge, yes, there's differences. Yes, your spouse, your husband's going to be doing things that you don't agree with, that don't line up with Jesus and his teaching. But your word, how you speak, how you interact, it will be from a submissive manner. It's not going to be this confrontational, clubbing them over the head with a nagging spirit and constantly annoying. Nope. How do you win them over? Without a word. but by conduct. And it's respectful and pure. So we're going to get back to respect. Respect is really important. If you understand men and women, respect is so, so important. And so respectful and pure conduct, that's how you win over your spouse. That's how, and in this context, a woman is going to win over an unsaved man by your conduct. They will see it. You're saying, I submit to Jesus, but I'm still going to submit to my husband at home. So it's very important to understand. That's, again, one of the reasons this is a controversial or not always taught about, not a fun one for a lot of preachers, because you can get into a lot of things where offense can take place. And to me, you listen to Scripture, that shouldn't be offensive for any Christian, because we are submitted to Jesus. His word tells us how to do that best. So a godly woman submits to the husband and submits to Jesus. And we have all kinds of authority structures that we all fit in, men and women. Okay, verse 3. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or of the clothing you wear. And so this is interesting. If you're looking at a couple other translations, I know I looked at least two other ones. What's one? I know it was New King James. I know for sure that was one of them. But it will say, don't let your adorning merely be external, which is to say, you can still look nice. You can still be presentable. You don't have to, every Christian, I don't care about my outside at all. That's not what, to me, I think merely does fit. I'm looking at the ESV here where it doesn't add that, but I still think it is appropriate to present yourselves in an attractive way, an attractive manner, to put your best foot forward, so to speak. Christians should not be known for their unattractiveness in appearance. That we just, all right, the culture says do this, so we're going to mess ourselves up and make sure we don't look nice. I don't think that's what it's saying at all. This is a heart thing. And especially, this is just a fun thing to do. If you have the internet available to you, which if you're listening, I'm sure you do. Okay, Google this. Check out Roman hairstyles. So I've checked it out, and they have all kinds of examples of the extravagance of hair during the Roman Empire, during that period. And that was a measurement of your class. It was supposed to be distinctive, to set you apart. And that is what women desperately cared about. Hair was so, so important. It was central to a lot of their, again, social standing. So it had a great importance to them. That should have nothing at all to do with a Christian, because the external doesn't matter. Again, it can be presentable. This is your temple, and there's ways to do that well and ways to do that poorly. But if you look at the context of the culture, that was, you get an image of someone, and that's the measurement. Okay, you look a certain way, you're up here. That has nothing to do with us, nothing to do with Christians. And we set people apart because of physical appearance today. That's why plastic surgeons stay in business, because people care so much about the external. And that's where their heart is. That's where their treasure is. And that's not of God. So women need to stay away from the external. Why is Peter saying this to women? Because this is a play the enemy would use on women perpetually. That their value is found in their beauty. Their value is found in what is outside. And what Peter is saying, listen, I walked with Jesus, and I know how Jesus dealt with women. He cared about the inside, not the out. He didn't treat women special because their outside was more attractive than someone else. Because you were born and you have your genes and someone's more attractive than someone. That was irrelevant to who Peter served. So that's why he's expressing this. He sees how the enemy is entrapping people, and we equate value to the outside, and that is not how God works. How does he work? Let's look at verse 4. Verse 4. But let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit. And here's the key part. Which in God's sight is very precious. So there's something you can adorn yourself with that God says is very precious. Should we seek after that? Should we go after that? Should we make sure we are adorned with it if God says it's precious? So let's dig in a bit. So what we see here is this imperishable beauty. That means beauty that does not fade away, that has real value, that God says is precious. That description we get is of a gentle and quiet spirit. So if you dig in, and I love doing this every time we're preparing for a Bible study, is you just see what the Strong's and the Greek or Hebrew says about it, and you get the literal translation, you get how they use the words in context of their time. And when it says gentle and quiet spirit, let me tell you what Strong says. This is what God says is very precious, specifically in a woman. It's meekness, mild, humility. I love this. Strength under God's control. We know Moses was meek. Look what he accomplished. He was a strong guy. Like he don't mess with Moses. But that was strength. That was power under God's control. And this is something that, again, God values, that he says is precious. It's peaceable, quiet, steady. There's a steady composure attached to this. And I love this last one. Undisturbed by external agitation. God thinks that's precious. So if you know, stereotypically, in a man and woman relationship, the guy's kind of the calming in a crazy external situation. I know that's been the role for Sarah and I. She's much more sensitive, much more attuned to things that are just over my head. My goodness, am I grateful to be married to a woman who picks stuff up that I just, no observance whatsoever. But where she needs help is to be undisturbed by external agitation. When the circumstances can get really harsh, I tend to be the steadying influence. And that is something that women can have as well. My wife's gotten amazing at this compared to where we were at some of the harder times, and certainly in just the sickness, where you're undisturbed by external agitation. That is what God says is precious. This is what you can adorn yourself with. So I'll go over them again. Meek, mild, humble, strength under God's control, peaceable, quiet, steady, composure, and undisturbed by external agitation. God says that is precious. Spend more time working on that than the makeup. More time working on that than figuring out what you're going to wear, by the decorations on your house, by any judgment of external class or cultural standards. This is what's more important to God. If you're a single guy looking for a woman, you want to see some things on her that are considered precious by God. The meekness, mildness, humble, strong but submitted to Christ, peaceable, steady, doesn't get messed up by outside circumstances. Those are precious things. Don't worry so much about the physical. Guys are dumb that way. We care more about the physical. And because guys are dumb that way, caring more about the physical, the women see, all right, this is what guys like. We're going to care more about the physical too. And that has nothing to do with God. So it's really important that women understand what is how they are valued. God says they're priceless and precious, but there's things that you can do that God says this is important. And those are the things, not the physical appearance. So let's keep going, and then the men are going to get hit here in a second. So it's okay, women. We're coming for them. Verse 5, for this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands. So that's an adorning in itself that God says is precious, is the act of submission. Even when your husband is wrong, even when your husband isn't saved, even when your husband is this flawed guy who doesn't look like Jesus and is making mistakes, God still says it's precious to submit. And of course, your submission is to Christ first, just like going back to governmental things, what we talked about last week. Your submission is to Caesar, yes. But you remember why Peter died? A lack of submission to Caesar. He chose Christ first. So in this married relationship, Christ is always going to be first over husband, over your spouse. And so just make sure that order is always correct. Verse 6, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you are her children, if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Okay, so calling him Lord, I don't need to talk to my Sarah and say, hey, when you ask me to help change a diaper, you need to call me Lord Andrew first, so we're being biblical. No, you do not have to do that whatsoever. It's the sign of respect. It's a sign of the heart. This isn't an eye roll of respect towards your husband. You sincerely respect him. And men know the difference between feigned respect and sincere respect. So it's really important to have this respect. And I like how this ended. So it talked about there, if you do good, so it's telling you to do good, and do not fear anything that is frightening. If you have a different translation, it may say any terror. What? So women, you are called to do good and not fear anything that is terrifying and frightening. That is just, to me, it's a very interesting way to conclude the section on the women, talking about how you have all this submission, and so part of that is not giving in to fear. And in truth, if we give in to fear, you know what it shows? That we don't have that fear or respect for our ultimate authority, which is God. If I crumble under fear, under terror, then I'm saying, God, I don't actually trust you. I don't revere you. I have more fear for the person who can destroy my body than the person who has control over my eternal soul, if that makes sense. All right, so that's the part about women. Men, let's talk about you. Verse 7. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. So there's a lot here in different parts. So first, husbands, live with your wives. This is something that gets overlooked a lot. Husbands, you get married, it's not about you anymore. You are to spend something very important with your spouse. Time. You are commanded as a husband to live with your spouse. That is a time thing. You don't get married to a woman and then you get a promotion. Now I'm married to work. You don't think Peter knew about this as he does ministry with Jesus for years? It is so important that you live with your spouse. This is a time dedication, husbands. That means, that stereotype of I'd rather watch the game than spend time with my wife. That I never wanted to be that, and I'm a sports person, and that was I was so intentional. Just so you know my background, this is how crazy I had sports in my life. I never missed even a play of a Ravens game, during the NFL season. Diehard fan, and I knew the stereotype of an unloving husband. And that, you always choose hanging with the guys or some sporting event over your spouse. And so I was so intentional. I went 2 years once I got married, I went 2 years without watching a full game. Not that Sarah was cracking a whip saying, you can't watch the game. No, I wanted to lay that down. I wanted to prioritize her, and I wanted her to know she was prioritized. And so if I got to watch the end of a game or something, sure, I would watch it. But she would know that I was choosing to live with her, not be with her, and then I'm going to separate myself because I just need me time. Nope. This is part of how you love your spouse. This is part of what I've seen is how you fight your spouse's insecurities and how the enemy's going to attack her is you give time. And that is a sacrifice because that means anything else in your life, your work, your passions, your hobbies, everything takes a backseat to time with your wife. So if the TV's on and you're watching something, hit the mute button when she's talking to you. Shut it down, shut it off. Your wife is infinitely more important than whatever you're filling your time with in that moment. And so that's one thing. Time is so important. Live with your wives. And then how we're doing it is in understanding. And understanding certainly needs to go both ways. But what it's talking about with husbands is your wife will not think like you. There's going to be things about your wife you will not understand. And so we're approaching a decade. We're not there yet, but we'll get there in a couple of years. We're approaching a decade of marriage. I understand my wife so much more than I understood her years ago. But I don't think I'll ever fully understand my wife. She thinks things out differently. She processes things differently. She is under spiritual attack differently. So much is different about my wife. My job, and I learned this early on, my job is not to fix everything that I see wrong with my wife. If she thinks something that I don't, or whatever. My job's not to throw a scripture at her face, not to say how she's wrong and make every tiny thing a big argument. So dumb. I did that. But I learned this is my job. I'm just trying to be there in an understanding way. And so there's times I shut off the TV. I don't hardly watch any TV. But there's times where I stop whatever I'm doing. And I just want, all right, Sarah, help me understand. And I'm not here to bring a club of judgment over her because something's not perfectly lined up with how I would like it to be. I'm to have a heart of understanding. My desire is to be understanding of my wife and have the humility to know I don't have her all figured out. And that's okay. God made her different. God made me different. That's on purpose. That means if we want to reflect Jesus the best, we need both sides. We need the way my wife thinks, and we need the way I think. So cool how God did that and then created marriage where we can look more like Christ together than we do separately. That is awesome. So that's the first part. Live with your wives in an understanding way. We are not harsh. We're not the judge of her. All right, showing honor to the woman. So that is a position, oh man, a position that we need to have perpetually. No matter what is going on, I hold my wife in honor. That means she is honored in this house. That means my children will not talk back to my wife. Why? Because she is held in a position of honor. You know, that back in the day, they would always have something if someone, said something to your spouse. Well, you need to defend their what? Honor. Defend their honor. Because why? The spouse, biblically, my wife holds a position of honor in my house. That is not contingent on whether or not she's doing something honorable. And so she can be an unsaved spouse. I'm still holding her in honor. Just like the Christian wife will be submitting to the non-Christian husband. So that means the husband will still be doing this to an unsaved wife. So it's really important. That position of honor is going to be held by that woman forever. It doesn't go away. That's such a protected place in the family. So showing honor to the woman as and this is also controversial. This is ridiculous that this is controversial, as a weaker vessel. This is not inferior vessel. This is weaker. This is talking about physical. This is talking about if I'm trying to carry my wife out of a house, I'm going to do a much better job trying to carry my wife out of the house than if the roles are reversed and my wife has to carry me. If there's a fire or something and I'm knocked out and my wife has to carry me, just leave me because I'm going to die. Like, that's how it's going to work, because I'm not going to be, she's not going to be able to lift me, but I can lift her. What is that saying? I'm a stronger vessel. I'm a guy. That we're created differently. And no, that's not universal. I know sometimes that's not always the case, but it's a weaker physical vessel. For example, is my wife necessarily weaker emotionally? I don't think so. I think you can make strong arguments. Stereotypically, women are stronger emotionally because men, we carry a lot of baggage with us. So and women are more in tune with things. There's an argument. They're the stronger vessel emotionally. Mentally, intellectually, I don't think women are the weaker vessel at all. Not at all. If you ever, even if we have the stereotypical roles, the man's going to work and the woman stays home, we've had to reverse that a lot. When I was sick, I just couldn't do anything. And you realize, I'm so grateful for that perspective. It takes real substance. You have to have character. You have to have patience. You have to have perseverance. You have to have endurance to spend all day with screaming kids. It is so valuable, that role, and it's something that our culture looks down on as inferior, and it couldn't be more false. Couldn't be more false. So this idea of the weaker vessel, yes, is pertaining to the physical, and that's okay. It's okay to say God designed women, and they have attributes, and men, they have attributes. They're different. So weaker vessel shouldn't be controversial. Let's continue. Since they are heirs with you of the grace of life. And so this part's important. We are heirs together. There's not, well, the men, we are heirs and we get a little bit more because we're men, and we run the house and we get a little. No, we're heirs together. We are a team. Together we are reflecting the image of Christ better together than we could independently. Together we are inheritors of what is coming. That is so exciting. When a Christian man and a Christian woman are together, it's a beautiful thing. And so you're heirs in the grace of life, and this is important so that your prayers may not be hindered. And I don't think this is a picture of legalism that you have to do all these things perfectly or morally exact. But it is saying this. I know when I'm not right with my wife, there's an hindrance in my spiritual walk. There's a hindrance between me and God. We've found, which let me continue that point with Ephesians 5:33. Just let me read this one verse. It says this, however, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife, and see that the wife respects her husband. Sorry, I butchered that. So this is this idea of love and respect. So if we go back to when my prayers are hindered, when my wife doesn't feel loved and I don't feel respected, if that's how that is working, then we're like this, and my prayer life is terrible. My prayers are absolutely hindered when my marriage is out of sequence. If our authority structure, and by the way, if you want to continue this thought, go to Ephesians 5, specifically 22 to 33, and it lays out this picture of marriage and the roles that each of us are supposed to have, and the agape love which I think I have that note. This is the love that men are supposed to have towards women. It's actively doing what the Lord prefers. It's a discriminating affection which involves choice and selection. And so this agape love, it's without condition, so we know that, but you're actively doing what the Lord prefers towards this person. And you choose it every single day. That's what the man is called to do. And so when my wife doesn't feel like she is loved, then it makes it much harder for her to respect me. And when I don't feel respected, it's much harder for me to love the way that I'm called to do. And so one person in the marriage has to make the choice, it's going to stay this way no matter what, and it makes it much easier for the other. And so then you just start charging each other up, and you ultimately get to the end of that verse in verse 7. It makes it much easier to pray. When your marriage is right, when you're acting in the roles you're supposed to, it removes a hindrance to your prayer. And if you're a husband who is dishonoring to your wife, if you're the husband who goes out and just can't say a nice word, you are dishonoring your spouse. I have to be so careful because I make jokes about everything, and there's been times I'll make a whatever joke and someone, thinks I'm being negative towards my wife, and I'm like, oh, no, sorry. Like, I do not want to do that. And I have to be careful about what I say, even in jokes. And my wife has let me know at different times. I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. Because I don't take myself very seriously, but that's not an excuse to dishonor my wife. And so I need to honor her. We see in Ephesians, love is a key part. I need to love her, and not just love her in my way, love her in a way that breaks through for her. I love that we can do that love language test, and there's different love languages. Just briefly, we had an issue with this with Sarah and I when we first became official, and by that I didn't ask her out until I thought I was going to marry her. Like, that's the deal I have with God. And so when we would first be in public, there was it was rough between the two of us. And I'm like, what is wrong with my wife or future wife? I'm like, why is this? She's like cold, and like, what is going on? And we talked about it, and she felt like I was completely rejecting her. And we looked at the 5 love languages, and we were inverted. So the top ones for her were the bottom ones for me. So I would communicate my caring in a way that it wasn't receptive. She wasn't receiving it at all. And so I had to change how I loved. Why? Because the Bible tells me to love her. And so she's a physical touch person. So you know what I would do? Just a little touch. A subtle touch, an elbow on the side, like something in public. And she didn't feel like she was rejected anymore. Why? Because her husband was loving. and I didn't say, no, you're going to be loved my way, I said a nice thing. Well, that was I'm a words of affirmation guy. Like, that words have a big deal to me. Not so much with my wife. And so you have to speak the language. That's the husband's job. You love, you honor. And I love that, we can talk about this stuff. And if you're out of order, what does it say? It affects you spiritually. So I want my prayers to be power-packed. So I better make sure I'm treating my wife correctly. So once again, ending it with verse 7, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way. Check. Showing honor to the weaker vessel. Check. You're both heirs to the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. Check. So there's all kinds of different aspects, and it's really important. So again, dig deeper. You feel free to touch on Ephesians 5. Has some great stuff in verses 22 to 33. But this is just kind of basic, what Peter learned serving under Jesus, what he learned from his own marriage. This is stuff that's going to help both marriages. And if you understand also, both sides are vulnerable to the other. That's what love looks like. That means if the wife does everything perfectly, yeah, the man can take advantage of that. And if the man's doing everything perfectly, the woman can. So there's a part of trust and then loving and respecting through someone's imperfections. We're meant to look like Christ, but no spouse will. We're all going to fall short. So we need grace. And if you're a woman, keep the respect up. Don't shut it down because of a fault or mistake or a hurt or an offense. If you're a man, never stop loving, never stop honoring, never stop spending time with. You keep it going no matter what fault or flaw you see in your spouse. This is what a godly marriage looks like. So I get more excited every time I go through it, and I know I'm way long, but I get excited about it because I get to see it in my own marriage. And I've seen this process and what happens when the husband or the wife doesn't do this. It's bad. Just trust me, it's not good. It's bad. So I'm learning a lot, and I can't wait years from now. I'm going to go back through it and be like, wow, God, you're teaching me so much. So that's what 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 7 has to say about marriage. We'll keep going in chapter 3 next week.